One cold, rainy evening in Boston, a man who had everything stood frozen in the subway station, watching a young mother clutch her two small children against the biting wind. Her coat was threadbare, her eyes hollow with exhaustion, yet she still shielded them as best she could. In that moment, something stirred inside him. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a sleek black card with no spending limit, and pressed it into her hand. "You have 24 hours, he said quietly. "Use it for whatever you and your children need." Then he turned and walked away into the night, leaving her stunned. Less than 1 hour later, his phone lit up with the first transaction alert. It was not food. It was not warm clothing for the kids. It was not a hotel room to get them off the streets. The charge hit him like a punch to the chest, and in the silence of his empty penthouse, the billionaire began to question every hard lesson life had taught him. Stay with me, because this story of one impulsive act of trust will take you through decades of guarded wealth, shattered assumptions, and a revelation that brought a powerful man to his knees. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 37-year-old Brennan Ashford had built an empire few could imagine. As the driving force behind Ashford Global Industries, a pharmaceutical company valued in the billions, he navigated boardrooms with the precision of a surgeon and closed deals that reshaped entire industries. From the outside, his life looked flawless: penthouse overlooking the harbor, rare art on the walls, and the kind of quiet that only vast resources can purchase. Yet every morning he woke with the same heavy feeling, as if he were a man slowly drowning, even though the water barely reached his ankles. His late father, Montgomery Ashford, a self-made industrialist, had instilled one unbreakable rule from the time Brennan was a boy. "Trust is a currency, fools spend freely, son. The poor are especially dangerous. Give them an inch, and they will take everything and still demand more." Desperation turns ordinary people into something else entirely. Montgomery repeated those words like scripture during long dinners and late-night strategy sessions. Brennan carried that warning like armor through every negotiation and every charitable contribution, which he always routed through layers of lawyers and accountants. He believed in control above all else, because control had kept him safe. Who was Brennan Ashford, the pharmaceutical empire CEO worth billions? And who was this woman, Sutton, fighting for her kids on the streets? Why did he hand over godlike power to a stranger? What did those charges reveal about trust, desperation, and the darkness in us all? Was this kindness or the ultimate test? Would she prove his father's brutal lesson right? What secret transaction would force him to confront everything he believed? That evening in the subway, Brennan had seen Sutton huddled with her daughter and son. Sutton was in her early 30s, a former nurse whose world had crumbled after her husband's sudden illness and the mountain of medical debt that followed. She had lost their modest home, fought through shelters, and now found herself protecting her children from the cold with nothing but determination and fading hope. She did not beg. She simply endured, trying to keep the little ones calm while the trains roared past. Something about her quiet strength pierced the wall Brennan had built around his own doubts. He approached her slowly, his expensive shoes echoing on the tile. Without a word, he offered the card explaining the 24-hour limit. Sutton stared at it, as if it might burn her fingers. She hesitated, but the weight of her children's needs won out. Brennan walked away, expecting the worst. He returned to his office, poured a drink, and waited for the charges to confirm what his father had always warned him about. The first alert came quickly, followed by others in rapid succession. Each one built a picture that did not match his expectations, and the more he studied the transactions, the more the foundations of his worldview began to shift. As the hours passed, Brennan found himself unable to focus on anything else. He paced the length of his spacious office, replaying the subway encounter in his mind. What kind of person receives unlimited access and chooses a path so different from the one he anticipated? He thought back to his own childhood, watching his father crush competitors and dismiss those who fell behind. Montgomery had risen from modest beginnings through relentless drive, but he never forgot the sting of early struggles, and he made sure his son learned to view vulnerability as weakness. Brennan had internalized that lesson so completely that generosity always came with strings and distance. Now this single mother was forcing him to confront the cost of that armor. Sutton, meanwhile, navigated the city with a purpose born of love. She made careful choices, stretching the temporary power of the card to address immediate dangers to her family, while thinking ahead to stability. One charge covered urgent medical needs that had gone untreated for too long. Another secured temporary housing that offered safety and a chance to breathe. There were supplies for the children, clothes that fit properly, and small comforts that reminded them they were still a family. But there was more to her decisions than survival, and as the receipts continued to arrive, Brennan sensed layers he had not expected. He began to dig quietly, at first checking public records and allowing himself to wonder about her story. What he uncovered painted a portrait of resilience that challenged his assumptions. Sutton had worked long shifts in hospitals caring for others, even as her own life unraveled. She had made sacrifices most people never face, choosing her children's future over her own comfort time and again. The more Brennan learned, the more the simple act of handing over the card felt like a mirror reflecting his own guarded existence. He had wealth beyond measure, yet he trusted almost no one. She had almost nothing, yet she moved through the world with a quiet faith in something larger than herself. The night stretched on, and Brennan found sleep impossible. He sat in the dim light of his living room watching the transaction log update, reviewing each one with growing unease and unexpected respect. His father's voice echoed in his memory, warning him of the dangers of opening the door even a crack. Yet here was evidence that defied the lesson. The charges told a story of calculated hope, not greed. They spoke of a mother building a foundation, not tearing one down. By the early morning hours, Brennan could no longer maintain the distance he had always prized. He needed to understand what this encounter truly meant. When he finally located Sutton the next day, the conversation that followed stripped away the remaining layers of his cynicism. She spoke plainly about the fear of losing her children to the streets, about the nights she stayed awake, planning their escape from instability. She had used the card not for luxury, but for the kind of security most people take for granted. In her words, Brennan heard echoes of his own father's early struggles, the very struggles Montgomery had later dismissed in others. The revelation landed with unexpected force. The man who trusted no one realized he had been the one living in a prison of his own making. Over the following weeks, Brennan took steps that surprised even himself. He extended support beyond the 24 hours, helping Sutton secure stable housing and opportunities for her family. He began examining the charitable efforts of his company with new eyes, removing some of the barriers he had once insisted upon. The experience did not erase his caution, but it softened the hard edges, allowing room for possibility. He still remembered his father's lessons, but he now understood they were only part of a larger truth about human connection and the risks worth taking. Sutton and her children moved forward with renewed hope. The temporary gift had given them breathing room to rebuild, and they did so with the same determination that had carried them through the hardest times. Brennan watched from a distance at first, then with more direct involvement, finding satisfaction in outcomes measured not by profit, but by real lives improved. The story of that rainy night in Boston spread quietly among those who knew him, changing how colleagues and acquaintances viewed the man behind the empire. Years later, Brennan would reflect on that decision as the turning point that brought color back into a life that had become monochrome. He learned that trust, even when extended cautiously, can open doors to understanding that wealth alone cannot provide. The single mother who accepted the card with hesitation ultimately gave him something far more valuable, a reminder that compassion and strength can coexist even in the most unlikely places. Their paths crossed for a brief window, yet the impact rippled outward, reshaping perspectives on both sides. This encounter stands as a powerful example of what can happen when assumptions meet reality. It challenges each of us to consider the walls we build in the moments when we might choose to lower them. In a world that often rewards suspicion, the choice to extend a hand, even briefly, can reveal truths that change everything. Brennan Ashford carried that lesson forward, integrating it into his leadership and his personal outlook. Sutton built a stable future for her family, carrying the memory of unexpected kindness as fuel for the journey ahead. Their story reminds us that sometimes the greatest revelations come from the simplest acts of courage on both sides.